This episode of the Southern Hemisphere No-Till Market Garden podcast is brought to you by Curly's Ag. Curly's Ag has been in the business of developing and manufacturing innovative ag tools for the past 5 years. In that short time, they have amassed an impressive range of new and patented tools now readily available for you. Curly's Ag is home to the world's only commercially available battery drill-powered power harrow, as well as Curly's Cracker 2, an automatic broadfork making soil prep and ease in any condition. Curly's Ag is also known for the Elia 3000, a multi-purpose tilther, mulcher and bed former all rolled into one, as well as the most recent and anticipated tool for every farm, the Hand E. The Hand E is redefining the market garden toolkit and taking the hard work out of farming. It can lift 300 kilograms with ease and smoothly maneuver over your garden bed without damaging crops. The Hand E's PDO powers the Elia 6000, mulcher and tilther, a power harrow, an auger, a compost spreader, a harvester, and more attachments. If you like to know more, please jump on their website at curlysag.com and feel free to contact them for more information. Curly's Ag are distributing in the US and soon opening up in Europe. This episode is also brought to you by Activista.
Activista's mission is to assist growers to develop soil-focused, diverse cropping systems with commercially viable seeds, appropriate equipment and soil inputs, and advice and feedback for all growers' current needs and particular situations. Activista is working diligently behind the scenes to maintain and develop their supply of seeds for profitable market farming. Small bulk quantities are at or near cost price. They have a non-GMO pledge and aim to source the best hybrid and heritage varieties to suit each segment and conditions of growers' needs nationally. Activista takes the battle out of importing specialized tools, providing sales and warranty support with all of their equipment range. They carry most, if not all, parts and have a direct line of communication with suppliers. Activista encourages customer feedback and gives personal attention to all inquiries as they see this process as a vital part of our vibrant, developing organic community.
G'day and welcome back to the No-Till Market Garden podcast, Southern Hemisphere season. My name is Mikey, and on today's episode I'll be chatting with the wonderful Erika and Hayden from Epicurean Harvest, New South Wales. I have always really enjoyed following Erika and Hayden's journey. I always feel they have a real honesty and authenticity in the way that they farm and they share their journey. So firstly, I wanted to hear about their experience growing unique and quality crops for restaurants and chefs, which their Instagram is filled with some amazing images. And secondly, I was drawn to chat with Erika and Hayden as they're managing not just their market garden, but some broader acres and grazing land surrounding it. So in particular, I wanted to know about their use of holistic management as a tool that they use to understand the intersection of market gardening and greater ecological stewardship. I will also flag and give a special thanks to Erika and Hayden because this recording, believe it or not, is actually a second take after I accidentally messed up the original. So again, a big thanks for your patience, both of you, and I'm very glad we gave it a second crack because it is a really beautiful conversation. But before we start, I'd like to begin by acknowledging the Wiradjuri and Darug peoples, the traditional custodians of the land on which we talk today, and pay my respects to their elders past and present. I extend that respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples listening in today. Let's start off by getting some context on the farm as it stands today and a bit about its size, location, and what you both produce.
Yeah, sure. Farm is called Bullamiri. We're in Hartley, which is just west of the Blue Mountains, west of Sydney. Farm size is 125 acres. The market garden is close to 2 acres, though not all under production all the time. We grow veggies primarily for sale to the restaurant trade in Sydney and the mountains, as well as we have done CSA box schemes last year as a bit of a COVID pivot and experiment too.
I want to tap into a bit of that early passion that you guys obviously would have brought with you being two young horticultural graduates when you started and moved from the city to the Blue Mountains. Could you give us a bit of shape to how that whole story began?
Yeah, we finished our bachelor degrees in at some point. I think it was 2010.
2010.
And then Erika was working at the uni, and
In
what happened?
outreach and engagement. What happened?
That's right.
No,
Yeah.
we went to France.
Oh yeah.
Goose.
Sorry. We went to France.
Hayden followed on with a master's in agriculture research, looking at aroma and flavour. And I sort of went to France for a good time, which was great. And then we came back, and as Hayden was finishing his master's, I was working at the university in outreach and engagement, and an opportunity came up in the Blue Mountains for Hayden to manage a market garden because they were selling the property and they thought it would sell better with a manager. It sold, and then they didn't want the manager after all. And we'd moved to the mountains at that point, committed to growing vegetables, so started in our backyard, had a few contacts in restaurants and very little space to grow anything. And it was, I guess, we sort of chose the growing path because when we were looking for work after our degree, we kind of were a little bit disillusioned with where it was sort of funneling us. We sort of learnt all these good practices, or the theory of good practices, and then being channeled into large sort of agribusiness or research, academia, or big companies, and didn't want to do that. So we sort of pursued an alternative route and managed to make contact with somebody to establish a market garden, a 1 acre market garden, and grew, I guess, from that point. And we were leasing land for 3 years and then moved to Hartley, where we are now, almost 5 years ago. Almost 5.
Yeah, no, I'm looking forward to breaking down the fact that it's pretty amazing you guys started on rented land, and now X many years later, you're currently on a property which you own yourselves, and you said is exceeding the 100 acres. I'd love to actually, before we even dive into other stuff, how was that shift mentally been from being farmers on rented land to eventually shifting to a property of your own?
Well, the step between leasing and I guess owning or purchasing land is pretty different. The leasing, the decision to go from leasing to owning was, I guess, a foundation of wanting to make land-based decisions that we couldn't otherwise execute because we were only tending to 1 acre of a 20-acre property when we were leasing, and we wanted to be accountable to the decisions we were making within that 1 acre, and couldn't necessarily be because of the surrounding overarching ownership, I suppose. Then when we moved here, it was we started with the drought, and there was a significant learning curve with what it is to be responsible for land through quite difficult times.
Yeah, I guess our induction into accountability and responsibility possibly wasn't the easiest one, but it was a fantastic journey the last 4 or 5 years.
You've built this market garden business, Epicurean Harvest, which, as you said, is largely based around supplying high quality and specialty vegetables to restaurants and fine food establishments. And like you mentioned earlier, you had a few contacts, but did you identify early that this was going to be the main component of your business, or did you kind of slippery slide or develop just naturally into selling to restaurants?
So the previous landowner had a similar model, and I guess in terms of that model of bespoke grower, direct supply to chef, he was probably the pioneer in the country for that sort of thing. So we saw that that model looked like it worked, And from a point of view of that, we wanted to turn an income. It needed to be profitable. So that stacked up, and I guess we kind of continued on his model but changed it and had to work our way through it as well, and in an ever-changing sort of hospitality space as well.
I guess it's important to sort of note that we didn't do any. I mean, we did degrees, in horticulture and agriculture, but we didn't do any internships or experiential learning to grow. We just started and problem solved as we went. And so there was no preconceived ideas of how we were supposed to be growing or what we were supposed to be harvesting or what was available or not available to us in terms of that area of knowledge or what we were supposed to be doing, I suppose. And I think that edge meant that we didn't have the boundaries put upon us that we may have had if we'd gone to a place and seen somebody's setup and seen, oh, that's how you do it. We were like, we sort of just started. And, we mentioned this previous owner. He was the person that was trying to sell his property and with a market gardener manager. And the new owners that we ended up having a relationship with didn't want us to be there under their management. We had to be an independent business. So we sort of started on our own terms in that way.
We kind of also just potentially overcommitted, or not overcommitted, but we committed to moving to the mountains. And that meant that we just had to make it work. So we looked at another land lease option up there, which fell through. But I guess once the idea seeded that this is what we were doing, we just kept putting one foot in front of the other and willing it to happen, I guess.
So what sort of crops were you growing in that early stage? You said you didn't have a huge amount of experience. You had a few connections and you were maybe somewhat following in the leads of that previous farmer, but were you just growing a wide array of crops that tickled your fancy and then essentially offering that off to restaurants?
Yeah, so the first year, and we were growing in the backyard. Erika was primarily still working at the uni, and we were mainly growing micro veg, which we could baby radishes and turnips and flowers and things that we could generate high revenue from tiny amount of space and maintain connection with these contacts, as well as there was a berry sort of orchard at the property that we went on to lease, which we negotiated with the new owners that we could lease that off them as a sort of see how we all get on and see if it's profitable. So we had this sort of berry thing going as well as the micro veg in the backyard. That was just enough. We sort of commandeered this other little block next door and just grew as much as we could. But there was a lot of micro veg, a lot of flowers, and we did a lot of foraging, a lot of mushrooms and lamb sorrel and sheep sorrel rather, and whatever we could find that was edible and sellable.
How much chickweed we sold?
I don't know, but it was significant.
Yeah.
No, a part of the reason why I asked that question, which I'd love to hear your thoughts on, Erika, as well, is that, as I've mentioned previously to you guys, I remember seeing you guys selling ochre tubers and leaves to restaurants, and I was pretty blown away at the time because I was like, first of all, what is this crop and how they managed to form relationships to sell that off? And I wanted to also know was that kind of that creativity, that entrepreneurial spirit, was that being sparked by relationships with the restaurants asking you to grow certain things? Or were you literally, like you're saying, foraging, collecting, planting, exploring?
Well, I guess, a really key point of us beginning was it was winter in a cool climate. So we actually couldn't grow a great deal when we first began. So we were like, what is edible and how can it be used? And we sort of started in that fashion. So we were looking at things that were possibly sprouting or, early spring, and things that were coming up that we could potentially sell. In winter, we were selling off apple wood because we could prune apple trees and use that, sell it as smoking wood. And it was just a relationship that we had with the restaurants that were interested in using food creatively, or, apple wood produce creatively, as well as us being creative with what we were looking at and seeing a whole crop rather than a particular area that was harvestable. It was that sort of has followed us the whole way. And the ocker yam, for example, you say the ocker yam, a yam is what is usually grown to be sold, and we probably sell far more leaves than we do of the yams because of the understanding that we have with the chefs and how they want to use produce, and how they want to dress plates. And that's a key area of understanding what you're growing. I mean, you're a market garden, so you've got to understand what your market is interested in and what they potentially could be interested in. And that was, I guess the foundations of our business, really. The Epicurean of our harvest.
Epicurean harvest. And so then what are you looking at specifically when you're selecting a new crop to grow, and then how do you go about trialing it and then deciding or considering that this actually makes the cut to come on your repertoire to sell to restaurants?
Yeah, I guess we don't actually do any sort of calculations by square foot of what generates what revenue. It's much more intuitive than that. We do look at our accounting software at the end of the year and see what made money. So there's a lot of intuition and just knowing, but it depends. It depends on the relationship. Sometimes a product doesn't need to make money if it benefits the relationship significantly. And then other times there's products which we need to grow, and they need to pull a lot of legwork financially for us to make up for those other products. So I guess, if it's a product that is really relationship based, it's got to be special and fun and interesting so that it feeds into the health of that relationship. And it might be difficult to grow and hard to harvest.
And that at that point, I think it's important to mention that we then discuss the longevity of that product and whether they're keen to still take it, and if they still want to take it and it's difficult to grow and difficult to harvest and difficult to transport, how they want to take it and what else can they take to supplement a difficult crop like that.
What have been some of those exciting crops that you've toyed around with that have been a delightful surprise that have ended up becoming a part of your crop lists?
I guess maybe skirret is one where we've primarily grown that for Peter Gilmore. It's really old. It's in a carrot family. It has this crazy rhizome that looks like dreadlocks on that guy in The Matrix, white dreadlocks, and is epic to harvest and wash, and takes all year to grow. But it's just super interesting, super yummy, and we can Pete also takes the flowers, and so we kind of work through it together to try and make sure that it's as profitable as possible. But really, it's also just a celebration of plant diversity and the wonderful things that exist. So yeah, skirret's a good example that's currently sort of there. I mean, there's other things like, beautiful, wonderful bent corns that we don't have a long enough season for, but we'll give it a go anyway because it just looks like fun, and that sort of stuff that comes around. But yeah.
And I think investing in the space and time for those things within the garden and within your relationship allows for flexibility and interest in, say, onions, taking lots of baby onions, and we sell lots of those little sort of pickling size onions, or radishes as a way of them honouring back the relationship as well. It's sort of like a there's an understanding of what's involved with a relationship within a garden. And that's the important part, is maintaining that relationship for them with the garden and you with them. And
all the relationships are different. Some of our relationships with chefs are really they're looking to take whatever works well for us. And so there's every relationship's different, and their restaurants are all different, and their needs are different. So, yeah.
I love, as you've been sharing, the way of looking at a crop in a way that encourages you to look beyond what it's conventionally grown for, whether it's a carrot and looking at its usually they're orange carrots, looking at different colors, looking at the shape of the leaves. I'm sure different varieties of carrots have actually different flavored leaves that most people haven't explored. But immediately also a part of me really wants to kind of, I've usually grown a lot more staple crops. The question of pricing jumps up, and particularly for crops which don't have a precedence or a comparative price in the market. How do you guys go about negotiating and working that out?
Yeah, it's this yucky. It's uncomfortable because there's nothing to gauge off. Sometimes something like the skirret, you don't find skirret in the market, so there's nothing to sort of work from, and it's also for good reason. It can't be adapted to sort of conventional mechanical harvesting and all that sort of stuff. It's too difficult. So I guess we were talking to a friend about the price of skirret the other day, because they're also trying to grow some, and I think we try and find something relatable. So I think we look to compare it to salsify or scorzonera, and also having horseradish in mind in terms of like the effort required to harvest it. And so then you're kind of like bouncing off other products that are similar or that might give you a bit of a clue, as well as then working with the chefs directly to see, what works for them. What are they putting on the plate? How much value does that add to their plate? What are their plate costs, and does it work or not? If it doesn't work, then we might sort of discontinue growing that item if that's necessary. But usually we find if there's a strong enough will, either us or them, we'll find a way of making it work.
I think it's important for remembering that how restaurants function often is by pricing how much it costs to put together a plate and what your piece is worth on that plate. So if it's a small amount, they can afford a small part of vegetables on there. Or if it's a complete vegetable side, they might be looking at a different way of using the vegetable, and trying to learn from them how they're using it and how they're plating it also helps you gauge how to price it. I know that sounds really vague, but it's a lot of like discussion on asking them questions about, well, what are you doing with it? What do you want to do with it? And, if you want little baby carrots or do you want big carrots, and how would that be priced? And how do you, what do you need? What do you need for it to work? And then what do we need to work is a discussion. And yeah, like Hayden said at the beginning, it can be a bit yucky because you have to bring up prices and negotiate a little bit.
And sometimes we're wrong.
Sometimes we're really wrong.
Too high, too low.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's whatever.
That's really a creative way of going about it. Like you're saying before, selling by the unit is something which I don't know a lot of people are doing. So you're saying like when you're offering a fresh list to a restaurant, you'll be pricing per radish or per carrot, rather than saying a bunch of carrots or a bunch of radishes.
Yeah, some chefs will kick up a fuss, and we just change it to a bunch, but everything has 10 in a bunch. But for some reason, that seems to appease
their function.
Yeah.
And I mean that's just learning. Sort of they've learned what a bunch looks like or what a bunch means to them. But most of the time, if you can talk to them about, well, this is how much per piece it would be, and it's equivalent to this much in a punnet or this much in a bunch, they can sort of translate how they need to work it into their menu. We've found initially the per piece works really well once they understand what's going on. When they get also a little bit intimidated by the like per piece, well, I'm spending this per piece, and that's where you sort of have the discussion. Well, it's the same as a bunch, but we're just not bunching them, and or it's putting value on the different parts of the crop, because if you have, say, a bunch of kale leaves, and then your kale bolts, and you've got a lot of shoots that are really delicious. You're wanting to sell the kale shoots and talk about those, and so that's like repricing. And so if you can put it into a per piece price, it's sort of a bit easier for them to see the value in where the energy is in the plant and how they can put it on their plate.
And what you're highlighting, I think, is super important, because a lot of obviously the undercurrent of what you're saying is it's based on pretty open, clear communication. Obviously, you guys standing your ground when you need to, which I think for a lot of young growers coming in, there is a bit of a fear factor around the celebrity chefs and knocking on a door and having chats with them. Do you have any tips on just going about creating clear and positive communication with restaurants, and also how you go about forming new relationships? Is it about door knocking, emailing? How do you do that?
Well, in terms of forming those relationships, I guess that's kind of a bit of a movable feast. Like when we started, most of our relationships are long-standing, and when we started, Instagram had just kicked off, and how Instagram was successful in that early period because I think that, whatever the Instagram algorithms were back then, that it generated it. We were the right business for the right time, I guess. And so that generated a lot of interest and contact through that chef scene. I imagine you could do a similar thing now. We also did do some cold calling, but we did have we had managed to get their personal phone numbers and stuff. I guess that I think now that the sort of pioneering stage of that grower chef relationship has kind of it's now transforming into something else. It's quite well established. So I think actually there's lots of chefs who want that relationship. They don't all necessarily understand what it means, and they might be a bit delusional about how much effort and they need to put in, but there's a huge demand.
Yeah, I think they've been following Hayden. I mean, there's a huge demand. There's also, in terms of establishing a relationship, understanding where they're coming from is an important part. And so asking them questions and wanting them to talk, like when you're in an interview, you're being asked questions and they want you to talk. It's the same idea. You're interviewing them. You're learning from them. And then you'll begin to understand how to respond with what you've got and what you're doing. And that establishment of relationship is key. I think that aspect is key, is understanding them and what they're interested in, but then fulfilling their needs with the connection to land and the connection to the growing process and the changing of the seasons, and an ongoing communication from you about what it is and what you're doing that answers their needs.
We also struggled a little bit in the early days in terms of that same sort of fear of the famous person kind of deal, where we were easily judged on price, and we did cave to their needs, and we did do crazy things like get up at 4:30 to harvest some yam in frozen ground because they wanted it, and we didn't want to let them down. So we learned that the hard way, that we had to then put up boundaries. So I think making sure that you've got a clear idea of what your needs are, and so you can take that into into the relationship.
I'd love to shift the conversation at this point towards talking a bit about climate and land management. And I'm excited to chat with you guys about it because you're two farmers which grow beautiful, beautiful food and have had a really successful business for a number of years now. But I think you've got a really strong backbone for talking about ecological farming and getting I think your voice into the activism space. And I know particularly now as the IPCC report on climate change came out, you guys actually did spring to my mind as well, largely because you farm in a place that has weather extremes, fire risk, hard frost, summer hails, drought, snow.
Oh yeah, we got the gamut.
I know, it's mind blowing. Your Instagram is mind blowing when it comes to watching the change of your farm through the seasons.
Yeah.
And you mentioned in a previous conversation with me how experiencing those extremities, particularly the drought, opened you both up to a new understanding and relationship with the land. And I wanted to ask you about that and for you to share a bit.
I guess the drought particularly, I mean, you could almost start with it's a lesson that we almost knew we had to have. We called our property Bullamiri, which means two dogs, and that was about having, dogs and humans have had a relationship for 15,000 years, and spike oxytocin in each other when they interact. And we wanted that concept of what dogs bring, which is loyalty and unconditional love to the property. And so when we thought that would be a great name for the property, we didn't realize we were heading into a drought. And there were times where we wanted to run, and we've wanted to, the Gospers bushfires were a couple of kilometers away or a kilometer away or something. And, the smoke that we had to farm through was for months. And there was a point where everything was so dry, there was no water anywhere, and the fire was getting closer and closer. And we're like, wouldn't it be easier if everything you hit a mindset of everything, if it all burnt and we could run away, we could just leave and we'd have a reason. And we didn't leave, and it didn't burn. And we sort of have gone through a process of learning that unconditional love is actually unconditional love. You have a relationship of care of duty, a sense of responsibility, a sense of connection, and breathing in the space and being part of that space.
And that space is belonging as well, which is priceless.
Yeah, and so being through those sorts of things, awaken that. When I say that, we've also had good counsellors because it was hard, but it was a big turning point, I think, for us, and feeling a sense of place.
It's a beautiful description, and I want to lean and ask that idea you're saying before about unconditional love and commitment, and circle it back to that earlier question I had. Is that also formed and develops when you become the long-term stewards and owners of a property as opposed to leased landholders?
I'm not sure. I think you might be able to have it as somebody who's not even farming. But that shift definitely changed things for us in that aspect. I'm not sure we knew that it was coming. But I think for like everybody in the Blue Mountains, there was a shift during the drought and fires towards, there was that sense of grief in relation to the landscape, and that brought everybody closer to engage with that space more and how they were feeling about it. But I guess, when the drought kind of started, we kind of started on our holistic management journey as well. And so that really brought focus to what was actually happening in terms of ecosystem function. And so that brought us, it put a new lens on things, and all of a sudden we were looking at processes and trying to see what was going on. And obviously that was quite confronting in a way, given the environment at the time. But it was a great means of connection and initiating connection to land as well.
Could you share a bit more about that? You said it was almost community wide. What was that fundamental shift in terms of that relationship? What practical things were changing inside the way you were looking, engaging with the landscape?
Well, I guess for the community, I can only talk from my perspective of and what I felt and what I saw and how I perceived the community changing. But I guess there was an understanding of a connection that maybe was not being honoured between people and landscape, and that attention was brought to that when that landscape was suffering, and that brought up the feelings of grief within people, which I think made them realise it just brought focus to that space. And so I guess out of the fires came so many great community interaction, like us and our neighbours, or there were so many positive stories that came out of it. And I think that that was special and a positive thing to come out of something like that, and hopefully people carry that that connection amongst themselves as well as their landscape onwards to help fortify them for everything that the future brings. I guess for us, it meant that we had cows, and we were holistically grazing those, and we were also managing our market garden, and we needed to turn a profit to pay our mortgage. So we needed to manage those two things primarily, in a literal context. And so that just meant, really monitoring, our ground cover, making sure that we weren't overgrazing, which became easy when, there was nothing left to eat. And in the garden, it was again monitoring, try to keep ground cover and growing things that were sensitive to drought tolerant, and we were able to grow those things without doing too much harm, but also generating the revenue that we needed.
Hey, you all, just jumping in here real quick to give a shout out to our Patreon members at patreon.com/no-till-growers. This site, patreon.com/no-till-growers, is the lifeblood of our work, and we appreciate so much the support. It makes things like this small series possible and just generally enables us to keep our work free and open to anyone and everyone. We can pay our creators for their work and then keep giving that work away for free. If that's something you believe in, please consider pitching in a few bucks at patreon.com/no-till-growers. Also, there are some perks there, like first dibs and discounts on merch, books, hats, events when we do them in the future, and at a certain level, or if you just bump up from one level to another, you get a shout out on the show. So big shout outs this week to Veggie Cropper, Stephen Smith, Ojai Roots, Scott Snodgrass, Jay Mill, Jacob Arthur, Jean-Martin Fortier, and Yannick LaPlante. Big thanks to everyone and anyone who supports our work in any way that you can. Check out no-till-growers.com/support for all of our support opportunities. All right, back to the show.
I'd like to dive more into the holistic management, which you've shared is something which it sounds like it was something which kind of birthed out of that extra awareness, and that desire to kind of long-term care of places, to have some sort of understanding of how to practically go about that. So you both completed, as I know, a diploma of holistic management. Could you share a bit about actually what is that process?
We moved here not with the intention of managing land, and then the land was here to manage or to connect with. And then we were given the opportunity to take a diploma through TAFE in holistic management. And holistic management is, I guess, a decision-making process. You're asking yourself a question of whether the actions that you're taking are moving you towards your goal or your goals or your family's goals. And there's a matrix of questions that you ask yourself whether that's actually happening, which includes community involvement or community I guess, community respect almost, whether you're respecting the community or if people are going to be disrupted by your actions towards your goal. And then there's other aspects like either ecosystems functioning, or do you cause a disruption in those ecosystems if you're moving towards your goal? There's also an aspect of work life, like what are you prioritizing? And it sort of goes, the overarching concept is about what you want for your future and how you work towards getting it, while asking yourself the questions of what you're doing, your actions to get there. And it allows you to monitor what actions you're taking to get you there, to make sure that you're still moving towards that goal or that life balance or that whatever you might want to call it.
It sounds like an amazing way of, you're saying, obviously more and more, I think the topic of management is being spoken about. And what I picked up from you is there's management and there's monitoring. And the monitoring part is that part where you're checking in with yourselves, and basically understanding and measuring practically whether there are improvements or deteriorations in your practices, which I think that's the super important part. And obviously that has an undercurrent of that holistic element. So not just focusing on one element, be it soil health, or another element being my personal life, but it comes across the backdrop of a whole sweep of very central elements into your life. Could you practically share a few examples of how you measure and what things you've applied it to on the farm site?
In terms of landscape monitoring, we monitor a few of 10 different sites for ecological processes. So looking at the water cycle, the soil, whether there's bare soil or not, ground cover, solar cycle, nutrient cycle, community dynamics, those sorts of things. So in a practical sense on the property, we're looking at those. But we also, a key area is not just about the property or the land, but also about you and your involvement with it. So we have lots of ideas. You move to a new property and you're like, I'm going to build a brewery and a bakery and have a farm of flowers and a vineyard, and I'm going to have agroforestry and chickens, and you want to do them all at the same time. And it's a very fast track to burnout. And you can apply that concept to wanting to do it all to the land and creating bare soil, or rushing to do everything and not being able to get it done and burning out. And we definitely were there for a little bit, wanting to do all of these things, and we had to take a step back and say, how are we going to reevaluate what we're doing so that we're taking care of us, so that we can keep taking care of things as well. And practical, I guess that comes also with having a baby. You want to be around more for them as well. So we've made decisions about not working all weekend. I say all weekend. Sometimes there's jobs to do on the weekend. I look at Hayden for those ones. And there's, I think that's a key area, is making sure that we're still connecting as a relationship within, ourselves and within our friends and family community. Because if you're driving in a particular way, then there's other aspects that aren't getting addressed.
Yeah, and when we moved here, I guess, we had built this business that was pretty profitable, really, for a market garden on 1 acre, and then, but it was not sustainable from a work level point of view. It very much wasn't sustainable. There's no way we could keep that going, that intensity that we brought into it. So we had to reevaluate, how are we going to move forward now that we had this mortgage, that the ability to service that mortgage was based on this outrageous work ethic. So we needed to adapt when we got here as well.
And I think a good example of that is we live 2 hours from Sydney. We were doing the harvest and delivery ourselves. And at that time, we were doing 2 harvests and 2 deliveries to Sydney a week, and ourselves. And then when we moved to Hartley, we were trying to maintain that and realised that we needed to change. So we did 2 harvest days and 1 delivery, and now we've reached the point where we do 2 harvest days and delivery to a wholesaler who connects our produce with our customers. Our customers still go through us; they deliver it for us.
It's amazing how it seems like it really has influenced quite dramatically, as you're saying, your overall property management, your market garden management, and enabling you to have this broad baseline for measuring essentially across your life all these different elements. Is it something which you're sharing as a tool in the toolkit that you'd recommend to other farms to immerse themselves into?
Yeah, definitely. I think, the 2 greatest things that it's given us is the ability to make better decisions that move us towards our context more effectively, as well as it's just given us a, I guess, I think of, not to directly compare, but like Indigenous cultures, you hear about, pattern reading and things in the landscape. And I guess those ecosystem processes are the closest thing that I've ever interacted with to sort of start to open that understanding of like the complexity of the patterns within nature, which has otherwise been sort of intangible, like it's been too complex or the mechanical mind can't really approach it. And so holistic management and insight into just looking at processes rather than all the minute details has really like allowed us to see landscapes differently and what feels like to us gain insight quickly. It's like having a new set of glasses on.
Yeah, definitely a new set of tools. I mean, because we both did science degrees, we understand the science aspect of reducing it to one particular testing parameter and trying to reduce any variables, whereas looking at processes encapsulates variables because it's an overarching observation and monitoring process. And I think that's those 2 things combined allows you to feel a sense of like it's just another tool that you are able to look at or look through. Like Hayden says, new set of glasses. It's exactly like that.
I think when market gardening as well, just reflecting on what you're saying, when you're market gardening on an acre or 2, you also have this kind of very, at least I do, sometimes this feel of being in a microcosm in this bubble, and it's also one of the most intensive forms of farming. You're kind of, you're manipulating the soil, changing the soil. It's annual based, crops are in and out. But what I'd love to hear as well is as you've shifted across to understanding grazing and livestock, landscape, and as you're saying, these patterns and water cycles, how has there been specific things that have changed the way you're market gardening and you're playing with the soil or different techniques essentially?
Yeah, definitely. We basically take those ecosystem processes and now try to apply them to the market garden as best we can. So, something like, if we have bare ground in the market garden, our water cycle isn't functioning very, is not a great sponge. Solar cycle isn't working very well. There's nothing capturing that energy. We can apply those cycles to any situation in the market garden, and if they can be improved upon, then that's where we'll put our focus if we can. So mulching or green manures or whatever methods we can utilize to improve our practice to move towards better ecosystem function. We'll now do that.
We certainly don't disturb the soil very much. We're on pretty poor soils of granite base and what they call a coal seam I don't know what they currently call it. It's just on the old maps of this area. And we very quickly learned that we needed to treat the soil with as sensitively as possible, because as soon as we did anything to it, it was quite stark in its drop in texture and I guess nutritional content. Really, it would
if we cultivated, if we took a rotary hoe to it, it just completely died.
Yeah,
and then became very, very compact. So yeah, we've gone down the route of minimum till, mainly just ripping and only ripping, broad forking, and tilting the surface of the bed. And that's contextual to our soil type. Other methods might be contextual to other soil types and situations, but we've definitely gone down that road.
But there's also a thing with market gardens aesthetically wanting them to look really neat and in control. And as soon as you start to take on the idea of those processes and the desire to have more ground cover, you suddenly let go of the need to have the straight lines and the neat, as long as you've got cover on your soil's pathways included. And it's difficult. That aspect is sometimes a challenge to explain to people who want to come to see the market garden and see it in an extremely neat fashion. And you're like, what I'm seeing is great, and it looks probably like a mess to you because there's weeds in the pathway and those sorts of things. And so you sort of accept the role of what weeds are doing in that context. Obviously, there's layers to that. There were so many weeds you wouldn't have a crop, so there's a management in that to make sure that you can still have a crop of carrots or onions, for example. But that's definitely a changed aspect in letting go of control of that area.
It seems like a contradiction, market gardening in a biodiverse ecosystem, but it can work.
And so could you dive into that as well? Like how, apart from, like, as you said, those subtle shifts and changes that you're including in, as you've started to explore a bit more about the livestock, are there some ecologically complementary crossovers between those two enterprises that you've toyed with or you've looked into?
Yeah, so I guess our whole farm philosophy is that everything's accountable to everything else. So primarily what that means is that the market garden is accountable to the land base, which practically at the moment our land base isn't hugely productive. So we haven't started taxing minerals being harvested by perennial grasses that are then being eaten by cows to produce dung to make compost yet. But the sort of medium to long-term goal is to be able to basically generate our nutrition from perennial plants that are harvesting minerals deeper in the profile to then use in the market garden.
And conversely, using any waste products, being it tops of carrots that you're not selling, being fed to cows or to be composted and to be spread onto the greater area of the farm. So going both ways of giving.
How many hours a week are you currently, or hours in a day, are you dedicating to the livestock? And I ask this because I think there's a growing interest amongst a lot of people. I recently was in the UK and had an incredible amount of parallel conversations with different farmers about the role of diversification, whether that being through cooperative means or expanding what your business has to offer. And I'm interested in kind of understanding those complementary enterprises and whether you do see a point where either you would have someone coming on and running the livestock alongside, or it's another something else to offer your community as well. Is that something you've explored?
Yeah, so I mean the cows are pretty cruisy, but they're also not really an economic enterprise for us. They're an ecological enterprise. But we can see how having more intensive enterprises like pigs or chooks or whatever would work really well.
For our size as well.
Yeah, I guess sort of from a philosophical point of view, we really enjoy cows. They're lovely animals. They have sweet temperaments that are very relatable and curious, and also they are doing that job of taking what is available and converting it and improving it, as opposed to a lot of other, I guess, intensive enterprises like chooks and pigs, where you have to actually bring in a lot of nutrition to meet their needs. Which, we're not against that at all, but we do like. I guess we just like the idea of the way that the cows slot into that system. I think multi-enterprise farms are just a great idea. We tried to have another person start an enterprise, and we had some difficulties and other things happened. It was just a bit tricky, but we definitely wouldn't be closed to that idea again.
I think they came 8 weeks into us moving here, and so there was a naivety that we went into it, and so with a few years of understanding of where we want to go and understanding what our boundaries for our context are, I think there's actually a better opportunity to have people here again now that we understand and are more firm around what we believe in and where we want things to go and what we need for ourselves as well. I mean, I think that's important.
Yeah, I guess it's a it's an ideology that many people have tried and failed. Probably lots of hippies as well, but it is based on good communication, and so I think that it needs to happen, and we need to go down those paths, and we just need to be not too ideological about it, but be pragmatic and maintain good communication.
I can also see how, Eric, you were saying before as well, that now that you've woven holistic decision making and holistic management into your lives, that once that context kind of became clear, the context of your work life, of your property, it becomes more clear to work out whether forming a partnership works. And I'm sure creating a shared context with those other people is a way, as you're saying, of moving forward in a progressive way that serves everyone and serves the enterprise.
Yeah, and the landscape, it definitely. And we just didn't have those skills at that point to navigate that.
Yeah, and I think having a very clear context for yourself and then working on whole farm context then gives a really clear framework for when that other person and their enterprise is coming in. They know exactly where things sit. That's really important.
And if it aligns, I mean, that's the important part. It's sort of their context needs to align in some way so that it can go together rather than, well, their context is different, but they understand our context. There would be conflict. So I think that's a key area of understanding the context of holistic management and collaborative work.
And when you say, and just to make some clarity in case there's some listeners that aren't familiar with the language of context in holistic management, context meaning that you've got a very clear outline of the values or parts of your life that are meaningful to you. So for you guys, it's not working on the weekends perhaps, or it's farming in a certain way.
Yeah, you could call it a goal.
Yeah, I mean, a context of how you want to live your life and how you want your future to be. And yeah, the values that you place on particular things, and then the backing up of that context is the actions you take towards reaching that future or present and future that you want for yourself, for your family, for whatever it is. It could be for your community. You want this context for your community. You want this context for this land care group of how it's going to be and how people are going to interact when they're at land care in, I don't know, the bush somewhere.
Yeah, no, that's great. Could you share a few words also on the land to market program that you're a part of, which seems like an exciting and unique part of like a new kind of movement almost that's trying to create some connections between consumers and producers?
So it's a relatively new program that started maybe 3 years ago, I think, was when the pilot started. It's essentially a verification program whereby producers or their farms are assessed and monitored for ecological outcomes. So the verification is called ecological outcome verification. And it's essentially looking at ecosystem processes across 10 different sites and a long-term monitoring site. And I guess the whole point of it is that you're measuring for outcomes rather than inputs, unlike most conventional or pre-existing certification or verification programs, where you're primarily being assessed on, what inputs you're using. This is about being accountable to your outputs. What is happening? Let's not set boundaries on what inputs you can use as long as your ecosystem functions are moving forward. And I guess that's the goal of the verification, is to encourage that consumer, but also producers to be able to farm in a way that is more accountable and regenerative, I guess.
And I think the land to market part is they are then connecting to those outcomes. The consumers rather are connecting to those outcomes through the ideas through purchasing of the products produced by farmers that are farming in this particular way.
It seems like exactly what you're saying. It puts a far broader emphasis on what does it mean to produce good food, which I think a lot of people, as you said, it's, there's a lot of taglines. It's organic, it's this, it's that, but more and more as we're moving into understanding, as you guys keep sharing, understanding landscapes and our broader effects. This is an amazing opportunity, I think, for farmers to really take part. It sounds like you take part in the process, which is it really also opening up your eyes? It seems like through your holistic farming, you're already engaged in that process, but is there an educational component as well?
The main thing is it inspires us to continue with the monitoring. The monitoring might be one of those things that just falls by the wayside, but the verification process, we need to do the monitoring every year at these 10 different sites, and just doing that monitoring, going to the 10 different sites and going through that process keeps you really engaged with actually how well things are functioning or what's going on. If you just kind of walk around the farm and kind of just,
Do you have goggles on?
Yeah, you have goggles on. Sorry, you threw me there.
Sorry.
Why have you got goggles on?
Oh, because you're looking at it in a particular way. If you're not
foggy.
Foggy, I don't know. I guess I was trying to chime in, I suppose, and say that when you're walking around without the intent of those monitoring sites, you can look at it through your own lens, your own goggles, and it's only when you have to step outside yourself and do this actual monitoring process and are forced to do this monitoring process do you reassess what you're doing. And that's not always the case. Holistic managers have been working for a long time and reassessing what they're doing and monitoring, and that's the idea of holistic management. But the EOV, the ecological outcome verification by land to market, enables new farmers who don't necessarily have a holistic management background or education in that way engage with their landscape and then perhaps even have a story for their consumers about what they're doing and how they're farming.
moving and looking into the future for you guys and Bullamiri and Epicurean Harvest, what are the things we can hope to see from you guys in the next 5 or so years?
I just wanted to yell hot sauce really loud. I was like, hot sauce, hot sauce.
Mate, share the hot sauce. Let's hear about it.
We have this dream of growing lots of peppers and creating a good line of hot sauces in conjunction with other things that we're doing. But I just got a bit excited.
People need hot sauce. People need hot sauce like they need the internet.
Everyone needs hot sauce. Do you have a name for your hot sauce yet?
It's just Bullamiri hot sauce. We have made it. It's based on the characters on the hot sauce are our 2 dogs, and they're based on tarot cards. It's pretty unique, but the flavors are pretty awesome. Our last season that we did was pretty fun.
It's hard to know if we're marketing to our circle of 8 friends or the greater population.
You'll probably find your 8 closest mates have a good representation across the board of your customer base in general. So you'll be hitting the nail on the head.
Yeah, I think that the next 5 years we're very much trying to focus on work-life balance at the moment. So we've got a 2-year-old and a tiny house, and so we've been trying to put energy into that. Meanwhile, the greenhouse blew away the other week, so there's that to do. I guess that was a change as well. Was a mindset change. A big mindset change was just how we approach working. I guess market farming is like there's a never-ending to-do list, and it's easy to try and tick everything off that list, and it can get a bit big at times. I guess when the greenhouse blew away, it was really easy to be triggered into freaking out and being like, oh God, not another thing to do. But when broke it down to like, well, this is kind of just what happens when you're market gardening, and this is our job. You go out and you build greenhouses, and then they blow away, and then you disassemble them, and then you build them again, and then you grow veggies, and then you sell them, and then they get hailed on, and then so you pull them out and you grow some more, and that's our job. It's still a lot better than sitting at a desk. So I guess, trying to just see what we do as a job it has made tackling those intense events, those weather events and things a lot easier.
Yeah, the next 5 years is about, I guess, being more present here. Not just about the job, but about, raising a 2-year-old and there's more community engagement that I'd like to be involved with. We would like to be involved with, and whether that's through a CSA box or through another sort of system or idea of relationship for people to come to the property, or who knows. But we certainly feel quite committed to being here for the next 5 years, especially because we're building some new rooms on our tiny house.
Congratulations. Hope to come visit. I'll crash a night if I can. Last question, guys, is moving forward as well into the future and thinking back to our question about the climate change and the challenges we're facing. What are you hoping to see from fellow market gardeners and those in the local agrarian movement and the small scale movement? What are you hoping from this movement to help push and pave a brighter future for everyone?
There's a lot of market gardeners that I feel work really, really hard. And so I hope I see a sense of resilience and fortitude. I hope that there's a sense of I'm taking the step forward to connect with people off the farm and bring them in. I think those are sort of key areas. I think there's a lot of, market gardeners that are doing a really fabulous job and aren't necessarily even being seen. So I would love to say, you're doing a great job, let people know. to them.
Yeah, I guess also, to not to take the responsibility on as an individual only. It's a huge, obviously the climate problem is enormous, but to have that feeling of like it's on your shoulders is unreasonable for an individual to carry that burden alone. So I think a lot of these problems are about community and the way that we actually interact with each other and how our social structures and all that sort of stuff. So I guess growing veggies is one part of it, but also we need to be present in vibrant communities that are working together as well. So if you're growing lots of veggies but you've got your head down and your bum up and you're slowly getting tired, then that may not be the way to best serve that cause. Just some balance, I guess.
Yeah.
Erika and Hayden, thank you so much for coming on the show. It's always a pleasure chatting with you. This is my second time chatting with you on the podcast.
We can do a third if you want.
I don't doubt it. I don't doubt there'll be a third coming in the next few months. So thanks a lot, guys, and I look forward to being in touch with you guys.
All right, if you enjoyed that episode and you're enjoying our Southern Hemisphere series, make sure to check out the show notes for all the links as well as how to follow our guests and how to follow our host, Mikey Densham. Consider signing up to be a patron at patreon.com/no-till-growers or just check out no-tillgrowers.com for more ways to support our work. This episode was produced by Mikey Densham with help from No Till Growers. Big thanks to Willie Breeding for the theme music. Thank you all for listening. We'll see you next week. Bye.
You guys did great. I'm happy to put a disclaimer at the start. I'll be like, these two are, this is after days of farming with a young child.
Yeah. And please, I don't hate hippies. So